Three, two, one. Hello, all you wonderful people out there trying to make the world a better place. Welcome to the Dead Man Walking podcast. I'm your host, Repeatedly Dead Fred, author of the to be released book, The Summer I Died 20 Times. Thus, the name Repeatedly Dead Fred, because that's what happened to me. I was repeatedly dead. Today, we are fortunate to have Eric Herrera, who is a combat engineer, or I guess was a combat engineer. Which,
Yep.
and he has an amazing story. He's one of the people we never hear about in many of our armed conflicts, but he's a vital member of the armed services, and he has a fantastic story to tell. So, please, Eric, take it away.
My name is Eric Herrera. I joined the military in 2005 until 2010. Was in the Army. As I said, I was a combat engineer. Our main mission was to find explosives and make the roads safe for U.S. and Allied forces in Iraq, Afghanistan, wherever they needed us to be.
Uh, I guess most people don't know that there's like the pre-bomb hunters like yourself. They just see, on TV and the movies, they always see the person at the site and, you know, they can disassemble any explosive in 13.2 seconds and save the day. But there needs to be people, I guess, like you, who find things so that these guys can go and steal all the glory.
Yeah, so combat engineers, what they originally were used for were building fortifications and clearing minefields. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what it was during World War II, Vietnam. Um, the job kind of switched when the Iraq War came. It wasn't really minefields anymore. It was these IEDs and the
Mm-hmm.
roads. Since we knew a lot about explosives and our training as explosives, we know what to look for. So they used us to go for do route clearance. And
Mm-hmm.
basically, what it was is we go 5 miles an hour down the road, and look outside the window for anything suspicious. Um, but the thing is, in Baghdad, there's trash everywhere. So you
Mm-hmm.
have landfills in the middle of the road. Like our medians here in the US, they're nice and clean, flowers. This is just trash. Anything you
Mm-hmm.
could think of. And a lot of the times these things would be hidden. But we would do these routes almost every day. We would go out 6 times a week, and we would memorize these trash piles. It got to a point that we would stop looking in certain areas because that area wasn't disturbed. Once that area is disturbed, we think that there's something there. And 9 times out of 10, yeah, there is something there. We would always get VIPs with us and say, "Hey, what? Look at that big trash pile. Let's check it out." I'm like, "Nah, that's been like that for the last 3 weeks. We're
Mm-hmm.
not going to check it out. We know it hasn't been touched." And just that, like, reaction from us, a lot of people are like, "Really? That's you noticed this? Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
stuff everywhere." Like, yeah, well, that's, I mean, the muscle memory of it all. Yeah, that's what it gets. Um, so we would find these, and once we do find something, we used to be able to detonate it ourselves, but they wanted always the technicians to come, so the EOD guys would come
Mm-hmm.
out. But depending on where we were in Baghdad, sometimes it would be maybe an hour, 2 hours, um, that they would actually be able to get out there to us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it came to a point where we were like, we want these guys to come out with us. And these guys didn't want to come out with us. They were really kind of scared out of their minds to actually go out with us. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
well, it saves us time and it saves you time. So what do you want to do? And it actually got to a point where we had to go really high up in the command and got these guys to go out with us every day because our job was so intense. I mean, we wouldn't go more than 2 days without finding something. Um, in our 15 months, my first deployment, we found 126 IEDs, and that's not including the ones that blown up on us or the fake ones that we found.
Wow. So I'm trying to get my head wrapped around why they would be terrified to come out with you because, you'd think the terrifying thing would be working on the actual explosive and that it could go off in your face, as
Hmm.
opposed to there might be one in the general area. So I'm not sure I understand their fear. I mean, obviously there's fear, but
Well, there was always another thing. I forgot what it was. There was a bounty on these EOD guys.
oh
So that was
wow.
another thing. If they got captured, I think I don't know what it was. It was some ridiculous amount of money for any capture of an EOD. So that was another thing. They didn't want to go out there and get captured by somebody. Um,
Mhm.
and we're like, well, we're kind of in the same boat because we know what to do too. But that never really stopped us from it. We just looked out for each other.
Mhm.
And there's there's stories that where we nonchalantly just grab an explosive because we know that there's no way it could hurt us. We know
Mhm.
that there's something that could possibly go wrong, and sometimes it's like, well, why are you doing that? Don't do that. Well, we know the same thing that you do, so I mean, it's not we're not as I guess what terrified of the fact.
Mhm. So you can tell with a quick look whether something's like a remote detonation or something's, on a timer or something like that, which could change how you'll deal with it.
Yeah, the ingenuity sometimes on these things were just incredible.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean, yeah, we'd figure it out. We look at it. We had equipment that we used to check things out. Um, Also, at the time, the EOD would use a robot that would actually
Hmm.
go out there, look at it. The robot would have a camera, it would have an
Hmm.
arm on it. They'd look over it, and then if they think it was an explosive, I mean, we rig up a little charge, and then they take the robot back out, and the robot puts the charge on top of it, and they explode it right then and there. So the
Hmm.
whole kind of like bomb suit thing um, uh, was more in the beginning of the Iraq War. By the time I was getting in there, that's when they started using the robots. I mean, we had robots too that we used. I even got into that suit too, and it is the most uncomfortable thing in the world. Um, but yeah, that's just evolving. That's what we had to do.
Yeah, those look like they'd be like an astronaut suit, except you're not in zero gravity. It's got to be just like
No,
what those had to weigh like 150, 200 pounds with all
it's
the.
it's heavy, and even underneath it, there's like a cooling suit. So
Hmm.
you're putting on a vest, and it pumps cold water through this like makeshift vest you're wearing, and then on top of
Hmm.
that is all the gear. Um, they were getting to a point where they wanted the gunners of vehicles to wear that, and
Hmm.
I'm 6'3", so I was one of the taller guys in our platoon, and they had me
Hmm.
in this suit in the gun hatch, and I barely fit in the hole with this whole thing on, and I couldn't move whatsoever, not even let alone try to use my
Hmm.
weapon. So that idea got thrown out. But then, yeah, those other times where gunners had to wear a little bit of extra armor, some suits, some vests. Um, but yeah, it just had to keep evolving.
So, what kind of vehicle were you in? Like some sort of adapted Hummer, or do they not use Hummers anymore? Or...
They used Hummers. We used vehicles that were called RG-31s. They're actually South American, or I'm
Hmm.
sorry, South African vehicles,
Oh.
and they're much larger. And you know how most vehicles they're flat underneath. These
Hmm.
vehicles would have like a V hull underneath, and the design of it was to deflect any explosives, but they weren't unpenetrable.
Hmm.
Um, we combat engineers were the only ones that used these vehicles, and we used them our first deployment. And toward the end of our deployment, they came out with a newer version, and our unit was the first in the military to get those vehicles. Since we were
Hmm.
in Baghdad and we were such in a hostile environment, that we were the first unit that actually got them. So they were a little bit more up armored. Again, not impenetrable,
Hmm.
but they did help. We had a large vehicle that's called the Buffalo, um, and if you ever see like the first Transformers movie, there's a
Hmm.
scene where Optimus Prime is fighting a Decepticon on the highway, and that vehicle is actually a Buffalo, and it has this huge crane on the top of it,
Mhm.
the hydraulic crane that hold maybe about like 250 pounds, and we would use this arm to move, dig, whatever we could find.
Mhm.
So yeah, we did have Humvees, but we were more assigned to these vehicles that were help protect us a little bit more.
So what would I think we get an inaccurate idea of what a bomb can do from what we see on TVs and movies. And, they do an explosion and a car flips up in the air and stuff like that. I would imagine the real life bombs are significantly more impactful and dangerous than things like that. Um, what would, is there a way to describe like the power of some of the bombs you had to deal with?
Depends on how big it is.
Hmm.
Um, I know I've been blown up 2 times, but I've had guys in my platoon 3, 4 times. It's a different experience for whatever it actually is. Um, but the one thing that's constant is you see the flash of light, and then a
Hmm.
second later, it's the sound and the boom.
Hmm.
But that it doesn't feel like a second. When that flash of light goes off, it feels like maybe it's like 5 seconds, but it's like instant.
Hmm.
Um, that's kind of when we know something's going on. And yeah, depending on how big it is, that's how the impact is.
So are they generally designed just to take out a vehicle like yours, or are they generally designed for, more mass destruction?
Depends on how big it actually is. There was
Hmm.
a point where they were using an IED that's called an EFP,
Hmm.
and the device was a laser that would detect heat. So they
Hmm.
would point this laser at an angle to where it would hit our vehicle engines, and it would detect the heat on the engine, and then it would explode. But these EFPs are copper cylinders that are almost like a foot in diameter,
Hmm.
and basically just like a giant bullet. And most of the times, there would be like three of them. Sometimes we'd see 4 or 5. I mean, we even found one that had like 15 in them, but it was so obvious that it was something that um, uh, we knew right away what it was. But a lot of the times where they would take a chunk out of the curb and
Hmm.
then mold this EFP into the curb and place it back to where they took it out. So it was almost kind of like just completely disguised into the curb. That's why we would go 5 miles an hour to be able to
Hmm.
see the discrepancies. Um, but yeah, it just depends on what what was being built.
So where do they get all the electronics for this? Like Radio Shack, Baghdad, or?
We would see beepers, cell phones,
Mhm.
washing machine timers. We would even see like a wire that would be going across the road, across the garbage piles, and it'd be like to a light switch in a guy's house. It
Wow.
just ingenuity behind it all is just kind of remarkable and scary at the same time.
Hmm. So after you find these bombs and deal with them, do you ever get to figure out, who built it and who placed it and, get them out of the equation? Or is that
Most, most
not
of the
so often?
Yeah, most of the time, no. Um, we would just if we found something, we would assess it, um, what it was, how big the blast area is, to give the information to whoever. So higher ups can decide what they want to do. Like they would decide the routes that we would take. They would try to
Hmm.
determine what things were being placed, where they were being placed, and most of the time it would be us trying to intersect or um, get into those time areas where they're trying to do something. That was the whole purpose of it all.
Okay. So I understand you've written a book about your experiences. Do you want to tell the audience a little bit about your book?
Yeah, it's called The Bomb Hunter Story: My Life Clearing the Roads of Iraq. And
Hmm.
it starts from a little bit before when I joined the military, through my entire time, and just going over both of my deployments and the different things that were going on. Especially, I went through Bush and Obama, so how the
Hmm.
military changed was for me during that time, and then up until I left, and then uh, fast forward a few years later until about 2009 to when I finally just started to figure out to help myself with everything that I was going through from the 10
Hmm.
years that I was in the military until then.
So what do you think is the biggest difference in the military from Bush to Obama,
Um,
or mostly that affected you, I guess?
yeah, me being a gunner, so my job was always to protect the convoy that we had.
Hmm.
Um, we would have our rules of engagement that we would have to follow. Under Bush, my 15-month tour, those rules of engagement changed maybe twice. While I was under Obama, we did a 12-month tour. Those rules of engagement changed at least about 15 times. And it got to a point where guys were getting court-martialed because they weren't following these rules of engagement. Well, these rules of engagement changed so much, order
Hmm.
goes in place, and then guys would get in trouble for it. I even explained in my book I almost got in trouble for doing it one time, but I
Hmm.
fought. I'm like, it's all I don't really don't care. Depending on the
Hmm.
situation, it's either us or them. Which one do you want it to be?
Yeah.
Um, and Nothing ever happened from it, but it was always like I always had this second guessing, and I don't like doing that.
Hmm.
Especially when it comes to the safety of our guys. And At that point, I was thinking, you know what, I really don't like what's going on. Even Obama changed where um, the requirements to get in, if you had a felony or any
Hmm.
kind of misdemeanor, you couldn't join the military. Obama took that away. And a lot of the guys that came in were just really guys that just, I guess, wanted to get away, or they were just the worst kind of people. I even
Hmm.
explain a couple stories in my book about some of the guys that was going on and what they did, and it was just not an environment I wanted to be in anymore. Um,
Hmm.
those were some of the decisions for my reasoning for leaving.
Hmm. So it sounds like the changes to engagement made it more difficult to protect yourself,
Yeah.
and increasingly more difficult to protect yourself. And um, yeah, I can't imagine that. you, the last thing you want is somebody hesitating.
Hmm.
So um, yeah, I can understand. Um, Now, did it change? Do you know of people that are still in uh, the forces now? Um, if any of that was reversed under Trump, or if it's gotten better, gotten worse?
For those guys, no, I don't I have no idea. But I mean,
Hmm.
we would hear at least once a week. It'd always be like a gunner got reprimanded for doing this, and
Hmm.
then they either get demoted or loss of pay or whatever. And it's like, and then they keep telling us like, "Oh, don't do this." I'm like, "Well, I think they had a valid reason for doing it, but you want to tie
Hmm.
our hands." So it was just something that I was just like, I can't do this anymore. But at the same time, I'm like, well, I'm still gonna do my job, even though I'm
Hmm.
thinking of leaving. I'm going to do my job because that's not
Hmm.
fair to my guys. Um, to shorthand them like that. We're in this together. So I mean, I a lot of the guys knew I was leaving too, and they
Hmm.
understood my situation. And but there was no reason for me to like, hey, I'm leaving. I don't really care anymore. But
Hmm.
yeah, some guys had the same reservations or reasons for leaving too, but they had their own reasons. I know a lot of guys didn't like how the military was going at that time.
Hmm. So I'm wondering, like, as if the job itself wasn't stressful enough. You were in there for 10 years, and you must
Five.
have seen five, and there must have been some like just unbelievable stuff that you saw. So as a peripheral to the job, and that had to take a terrible mental toll, an emotional toll, and just on your day to day, and then when you came home, what are your thoughts on that stuff?
It takes a toll on everybody. My uncle was a Vietnam vet and he was a combat engineer. I leaned on him for a lot of advice. So when I did come back, he knew there were things that were wrong. Like he knew like my demeanor, everything. He knew things were going on. So he would always talk to me. Um, Things to see, especially at that age, is
Mhm.
kind of difficult to see. I never expect at 19 I'd write my will. That's something 19-year-olds don't do.
Yeah.
So yeah, writing a will was a thing. Life insurance at 19, that's nothing that you're ever thinking of at that age.
Mhm.
Um, you had to be an adult quick, and um, a lot of guys just leaned on each other. I mean, we're all in this together. We're gonna
Mhm.
get it through together. And during my deployments, we did lose people, and us leaning on each other got us through it. Being able to talk about it, but it was more that we kept it to ourselves because no one was experiencing what we were experiencing,
Right.
and that's just something that we had to do.
So why did you write the book? Like what message do you want to get out to people? Or, maybe there is no message. Maybe it was, sort of like my book started off as sort of therapy and journaling and stuff like that. And then it got out of control and became a book. So what was your situation?
Pretty much the same thing. Um, from the time I left 2010 to 2019, I was going through a lot with my time in the military. I tried doing therapy that didn't work. I was doing different
Hmm.
things, trying to keep my mind off it. I kept marine fish, so I built my own fish tanks. I built a 600-gallon system.
Oh, wow.
I kept sharks and stingrays. That was something that kept my mind off the things. Just that
Hmm.
hobby. That was my therapy. It wasn't until 2009 I actually had my final breakdown in my kitchen,
Hmm.
and that's when I kind of started my healing. I was feeling better. The fish keeping wasn't helping me anymore. It became more of a job, and I had to find something else. Um, I was like, well, I'll do videos. I'll talk about what's going on, but I really didn't have a platform to get that message out there. So, I
Hmm.
just started writing. I just started writing about the incidents that happened, the time we lost soldiers. Just started writing all that, and I was feeling better. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to keep going. I started writing more stories, and I said, you know what? Let me start from the beginning and start from the end and leave every emotion that I have on the paper. And after writing it, it took me 4 months. I felt like a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. So the whole thing about the book was kind of like therapy for me.
Hmm.
But then when after I wrote it, I started getting responses more from like family members of soldiers, like
Hmm.
trying to get into the mindset of their soldier, like trying to understand what they're feeling, what they're going through. And I'm like, that's something. And then that's when I decided, you know what, I'll try to go on podcasts and get that message out there, especially for people that have soldiers that they don't know how to handle or deal with or connect with. And that was me trying to get that awareness out there. I've
Hmm.
been kind of doing that for the last 2 years. I took
Hmm.
a little hiatus on it, but I'm back on it now. Right now, I actually have a military Hummer that I purchased, and I take it to car shows, and I take it to
Hmm.
special events, and a lot of the times we get veterans come up and talk with us, and we might be there for a half hour, we might be there for an hour, just talking with them about their time in the military, about the vehicle.
Hmm.
I mean, I sometimes get Vietnam vets that never spoken about their time ever, all of a sudden just opening up to me about their time.
Wow.
And and that's just that giving back is something special for me. Um
Hmm.
I I still have one time a young man, he was a mechanic in the army. He came up and he's had his uncle with him and he's like, "Hey, I worked on these vehicles." And they literally spent an hour going underneath the vehicle, in the vehicle,
Hmm.
showing his uncle what he did. And how he did it. Just being able to give that bonding experience between family members and soldiers to understand what they do and how they feel
Hmm.
is worth it for me.
For sure.
That's my way of giving back now.
So, do you have your own podcast, or are you mostly just guesting on other people's podcasts?
I guessed I have a TikTok. I do military
Of course, you do.
I do military jokes and things like that.
Hmm.
Uh, Trying to get a better response. I never thought I would ever be doing like any of this in my entire life. I never thought I would
Hmm.
ever write a book. Um, I was always terrible in English classes, and it
Hmm.
wasn't until after the military I went back to college, and my English teacher was a linguist, and he helped me understand language, understand
Hmm.
how things are written, how things are said, and I started getting A's in my English classes when I went back to college, and that's how what helped me write my book too.
Hmm. I was on a podcast a couple months ago with a gentleman named Dylan, and I can't remember his last name, but I'll get it to you. And he has a massive TikTok following. Um, I can't remember where he served, but the two of you should definitely connect. I think you'd have
Yeah,
lots to talk about. So sorry, Dylan. Memory issues. So.
yeah. I did a podcast at the beginning of the year with Jeff Struker. He
Hmm.
was one of the soldiers during Black Hawk Down on his podcast,
Oh
and
wow.
he was a he was a breacher too. So we were able to talk about um, his time while he was
Hmm.
in and my time, and just exchanging stories about our times on like the ranges for explosives and things like that. So,
Hmm. So, if people want to get a hold of you, to either have you as a guest or come speak to their organization, what have you, see your vehicle, how do they get a hold of you?
um, yeah, I'm in the Chicago area. So
Hmm.
every during the summertime and the fall, there's always car shows going on. So I'm always at those events. Um, my book is on Amazon, but yeah, as I said, I am on TikTok, and it's Sapper 720. So SAPPER 720. Message me on there. That's really the only platform I have. Um, and It's growing, been growing for the last year. So uh, it's a lot of relatable stories for military members to come on and tell their stories as well. So it's a fun environment to be a part of.
Okay, so not to put pressure on you, but what's your best military joke?
Military jokes. Oh,
Hmm.
we so I do a lot of them on my TikTok, but it mostly has to do with things in the military. So it's always like, what's the one? He says, "Oh, I need you to change the oil on the air filter," or "I need you, I need an exhaust sample." Um, so what it would be, we would have like the young private would have a big garbage bag, and he would
Hmm.
have in front of the exhaust, and you just blast the accelerator, so then dude flies away. Or especially on some of the tanks and the carriers, the exhaust goes up, so the guys would be
Hmm.
up above the vehicle with the trash bag, and then it would literally lift them up while they're trying to grab all the exhaust air, even though
Oh,
it's non-existent. Yeah, it's just those type of jokes we play on privates.
yeah, got to have some fun out there too.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Eric Herrera, you are a very special person, and I applaud what you're doing and thank you for your service. I wish you all the best. And people, give Eric a follow. Find him on TikTok, and reach out to him and invite him on your podcasts or to speak at your events. And I'm just going to wrap up. So, thank you to all the listeners or viewers or whatever you are. I appreciate you taking your time to listen to the Dead Man Walking podcast. So, as the cool kids say, like, subscribe, share, do all the cool things to get the word out. And remember to think of our veterans and to say hi and thank them. This is the Dead Man Walking podcast signing out. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
You're very, very welcome.